Thanks, Mrs. Rex. Thanks, Jules. Feeling loads better. Thank you. Um, I'm going to talk about a couple of documentaries I watched and poverty, but first of all, I'm going to read you a brief excerpt from a book I'm reading. It's an amazing book. Really pleased I chose this author again after a gap of 2 or 3 years. The book gives me everything I could want from a book. Um, Good character development. I'm engaged with the characters. I'm engaged with the story. I'm not going to say um, what bits I'm engaged with because I don't want to give it away because I want you to guess what the book is or who the book is, what the book is, and by whom. Um, but I'm really enjoying it and it's holding my attention, and I haven't found that for ages in a book. So this this excerpt, I thought you'd enjoy. So you can guess the book, um, but don't give away any endings or anything because I'm only 50% of the way through. There was a major plot twist at 48%, so don't tell me anything beyond that. It takes 21 days for a worker bee to go from egg to adult, 24 for a drone. A queen takes 16 days and then will go on her maiden and only mating flight. She flies into the sky, releasing pheromones to let the drones know it's their lucky day. The ones who fly fastest and highest even get 7 minutes in heaven, so to speak. A drone turns and the tip of his abdomen inside out to expose his penis and shoves it into the queen's sting chamber. When he ejaculates, you can actually hear it. Once his sperm is in the queen, his penis snaps off, staying inside her. He falls to his death as another drone hooks up with her. At the end of this orgy, when the queen goes back to the hive, she has enough fertilized eggs inside her to last a lifetime. So that's the book I'm reading. So you can tell me, what am I reading? Who's it by? But don't tell me the ending. So I've been I watched a couple of old English documentaries on poverty. First one was done in 1958 and I would have been 3, and it was set in an old northern town and in northern England. And I may have spoken about it in a previous blog over the last few days, but I can't remember. And then I watched one this morning that was recorded in 1969, so just over 50 years ago, in a northern town in St Anne's in Nottingham, of people living in the slums there, and just how their life was and how fucking awful, absolutely awful their life was in the slums. And it made me think about how, when you're in that situation, or how I understand, because I haven't, I'm going to say obviously, not obviously, but I haven't been in that situation myself. When you're in that situation and you're in at the lowest, on the lowest rung, struggling to find shelter for your family, security, safety, struggling to find food. What have I got listed here? Sufficient rest, clothing, health, security, protection from violence and theft, and emotional stability. When you're there, you're on the bottom 2 rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you're in that space, having any energy left to cope with pulling yourself out of poverty, moving yourself and your family out into better conditions, finding better work, finding more food, or just improving your life is very, very difficult, because you're consuming so much energy to maintain. It's like, I suppose you can liken it to treading water. I mean, you're just treading water, and the only thing you can do is tread water, keeping your head above water, holding your kids' heads above water to keep yourselves alive, leaving no energy for anything that will move you up into a higher rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there's a large proportion of people, I don't know how big the proportion is, there are a lot of people that look upon people in poverty and make big assumptions about how they got there and how they could get out of it, and how we all are able to get out of it, how we all have the same opportunities in life. We can all make different decisions and find ourselves in better positions. Lots of superficial lots of superficial thinking about how you can do that, and a complete lack of ability to be in those shoes of those people in that space. And it just always astonishes me. I looked up on the internet 7 tips for breaking the cycle of poverty. Educate yourself. Okay, how do you do that? The school in the 1969 documentary, they spoke to the headmistress of the school, and she was really very, I don't know the words, I can't tell you the words, but she really knew what was going on for those kids. She really understood why the children were not thriving, why the children were struggling. She really understood that they weren't sleeping well. There were often 3 in the bed, top to toe. They weren't sleeping well. They were sick a lot of the time because they were living in incredibly damp conditions. And one of the examples she used was a child. She said sometimes a child had gone off to the toilet and they'd been gone for an hour, and you go and look for them and you find them there just sitting there. And she said, and what we understand is that sometimes in their life at home, they don't have that opportunity to just sit alone in their own space, uninterrupted, quietly, to reflect. That was amazing for 1969, for her to have that sort of insight into what might be happening for that child. I was very impressed. They interviewed a young couple who had got, I don't know, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, roughly. All of the women in this, St Anne's it was in Nottingham, all of the women that were in this documentary were not going away from home to work. The husbands were going away and earning a wage, but the women were staying at home and doing the things that they needed to do at home. And some of them were doing what I understood to be called piecework, which is that you can work from home and you're working on a small, they were working on Nottingham lace. They were taking bits of lace apart, I think obviously for reusing, but they were taking bits of lace apart, and they were being paid per, I don't know, per ounce, per pound, I don't know how they were being paid, but the struggle was that some days the lace was easier to take apart than others, but you still ended up being paid the same as if you'd undone something. So when you undo something easy, you've been paid a bit more, but when you undo something hard, you don't get paid anymore. And one of the women that was doing this was interviewed, and she preferred to do it at home. A lot of others were doing it as a part of a sort of a communal activity, and many of them were going to the wash house to do their laundry as a communal activity, and which obviously was good for them to have that communal activity. But this particular woman who talked about her anxiety worked on her pieces of lace at home. Now she talked about, very matter of factly, about her anxiety, but did not look anxious. And that's me saying she didn't look anxious. That's not me denying that she was anxious. She talked about how when her husband was working, she was waiting for him to come home, so she wanted him to be at home with her. She felt safer with him at home with her. She was standing behind him doing the ironing, and he was sitting on a sofa in front of her, which, was quite common back then, wasn't it? The woman was standing doing the ironing and the man was sitting watching television. But in this case, she wasn't out going and doing a job. in the way that he was, and his job was very manual. And so she talked about that, and she talked about that she smoked. And the interviewer sort of asked her about that and said, though, does that not, it doesn't help your financial problems? And she said, I know, but if I didn't, I don't smoke a lot, but if I didn't smoke, I'd be so anxious. It helps allay my anxiety. If I didn't smoke, I'd end up in the mental asylum. Talked about the television. Again, he wasn't, I don't think his question was from a judgmental position. I think he was voicing what other people have voiced about, well, they've got a television. I mean, nowadays people go, oh, they've got flat screen television. In some way, it's as if they're not allowed to have anything to give them an escape from their dire situation. So they mustn't have a television to entertain themselves and to escape into the equivalent of Strictly Come Dancing. And they're not allowed to smoke. Another way of dulling down anxiety feelings. And I can vaguely relate to that because I smoked up until I'm 1999. And I wasn't a massively heavy smoker. I was probably smoking about 12 to 15 a day. Eventually, several attempts, I gave it up, and I gave it up for good, and I haven't smoked since. But during those first few weeks of giving it up, I was working with a client who was massively angry with me, and she'd always been massively angry with me at times. That was the type of client we were working with. But I hadn't quite realised how the smoking and the nicotine that was in my body was protecting me from perhaps the level of anger. And I carried on working with this client, having stopped smoking, and I could feel physically the anger. And I'd go home with something like pins and needles all the way up and down my arms, sort of feeling her anger tangible anger, which was quite a shock. So it gave me an insight into how much smoking and nicotine suppresses some feelings, because that's what I had been doing with cigarette smoking and I hadn't realised. So this woman smoked. So I was sort of struck by, when reading some of the comments under the 1969 one, and some of the comments were relatively recent, and comparing it to how things are today, and knowing that there are people, I don't know how many, still struggling, still in that type of cycle. And it could well be the same, the same families are stuck in that cycle. And it could be new families that are stuck in it. There'll be people that are being forced into that now because of the terrible decisions being made by governments and people, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So there'll be people going down into that level of poverty, I'm sure. And I don't know what the statistics were, how many were in poverty back then and how many there are now, and what the mortality rates were back then and what they are now. I don't know any of those stats. I'm not very good at stats. I like looking at stats, but I'm not very good at remembering them. But it isn't ever going to change. And I think it's important to know that whatever these people do, this list of 7 tips for breaking the cycle of poverty, educate yourself. Well, that's okay if education is free and you've got the energy and the time and a goal. What do you educate yourself with, and will that necessarily get you out of the hole you're in? If you think about all the kids that came through with degrees, didn't necessarily get jobs that back in the olden days we would have believed a degree would get you. Change your mindset towards money. What do you change it to? Change your mindset to avoid predatory payday lending. Well, that's all very well for people that have never had to take out a payday loan, never had to run up a credit card, never had to deal with the provi man at the door. I was shocked when I was the man from the Pru back in the 80s, 90s, that I would go and call on people who also had the Provi Man come to the door, and how they were ending up with 100% interest on what they'd borrowed. Absolutely shocked. I hadn't heard of the Provi Man. It wasn't something that I sort of realised as I was reading this that I'd grown up in a much more privileged situation, and I hadn't quite appreciated it. My dad was a police officer, and I think that as a result of that, we were housed. It wasn't our house; it was a police house, but we were housed, and the houses were pretty well appointed. That's how I grew up, and that's how I understood things would be, and it didn't quite occur to me that it wasn't. It didn't quite occur to me how privileged it was, and it certainly wasn't much compared to the people I lived around, the people in the town that we lived in. It was a very, very rich town, and people with very big houses and swimming pools. So I suppose comparing myself to others meant that I didn't see actually what I really had, and what I really had was really good. Focus on your credit. I think this is more about finances, and don't be afraid to walk away. And I think that's something about don't be afraid to walk away from a bad deal. But if the bad deal is the only choice you've got, you can't. How can you walk away? If the choice is I take that and then I can feed my kids for another couple of days, then that's what you do, isn't it? It's just impossible. So that's that. Horrible, really horrible. Worth watching. I'll put links into both of them in the description of this vlog. And I reloaded my painting. I reloaded the painting because YouTube had said, do you want us to edit it into a short? And I thought, oh yeah, okay then. So I let them do it, which left me without being able to do a thumbnail, without being able to add music. And I had left it focused on the end of the painting for a bit longer so that you could see what had happened, and YouTube just zipped past and then it was back into a reel again. So I unloaded it and reloaded it, and I know someone commented, and I'm sorry I can't remember your name, but I did see your comment and thank you. So whew, bit out of breath. Whew. Yeah, so I'm going to go back to my book. I'm going to go back to my game. I'm not going to do any more painting. I've got to work out how to put my lighthouse in here, how big to make the lighthouse. Certainly don't want it the width that I'd got on there before. I've got to try and get some seagulls in for somebody. They're the bits I won't be. It's easy when you can do birds, little black lines in the sky, but something that looks more seagull-like, I'm not sure, but I'll give it my best shot. And I need to get some sort of brown seaweed on these rocks. But that's for another day, not today. Okay, have a good day. Today is Thursday, and it's not net new near. Okay, bye.